Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
As honeymoons go, this is a long one. The Carney government was elected 15 months back, and the latest polling research about the popularity of not just the government, but the economic policy of Mark Carney is holding up really well with Canadian voters. Nanos research just conducted a survey that showed over 60% of Canadians still believe that Prime Minister Mark Carney has done a good job handling the economy. Some say very good, which, though, flies in the face of the actual economic data. We've had 3 of the past 4 quarters being negative. In fact, the first year of the Carney government was the worst economic output level of any first year of a government dating back to the 1960s. So what is it where Canadians are still pretty optimistic about how things are going? Is it something that's out of the government's hands? More to do with what's happening in the United States or world affairs? Or are these policies expected to pay off over the long term? Welcome to In This Economy. My name is Mike Eppel, and joining me on the line today is Nick Nanos, the chief data scientist with Nanos Research, who conducted all of these surveys with the voting public. Nick, good to see you. Good to talk to you again.
Great to join you and all your listeners, Mike.
Yeah, so these are interesting because I don't think we've seen in the past where the electorate has as much patience with a new government that came in saying, elbows up, and we've got all these fresh ideas, even though it's still a continuation of the Liberal government. But it seems like it's paid off. Maybe, what's your take on this? Is it a fact that, we've got the opposition of the United States, the big baddies, so to speak, in the States that are maybe as something that we're still fighting against, or a weak opposition, or does it come back to the actual policies that Carney has laid out?
Combination of 3 things, Mike. It's the situation with Donald Trump and the United States, Mark Carney's personal brand, and Pierre Poilievre's personal brand. And, the thing is, what we're seeing is basically an environment where, and, you talked about the Liberal government, but I think we should just call it the Carney government, because Carney is much more popular than the Liberals. And he has a significant advantage over Pierre Poilievre. Like, when we ask Canadians who they prefer as prime minister, I think Mark Carney's at like 52%. And Pierre Poilievre's at 23%, so a massive advantage. The Liberals still have advantage in ballot support, but not as big as Mark Carney over Poilievre. But I think a lot of it maybe has to do with the fact that people think that he's the best person to manage the relationship with Donald Trump, and also from the survey that we did with Bloomberg News, his handling of the economy is seen as being positive. But what's interesting is what you put your finger on. This in the context of consumer confidence being flat, and people were still worried about about how strong the economy will be in the next 6 months.
Well, getting back to the prime minister, is some of this have to do with his bona fides coming in? Bank of Canada governor, Bank of England governor,
Yeah.
The economic background that he came in with. And maybe compare and contrast, dare we, to Justin Trudeau, who, voters had kind of grown tired of. There were a lot of ideas, but that were never followed through on. And then in this case, the Carney government is coming up with, pipelines and rail projects and all these big ticket items. They've yet to get started building any of this. Keep that in mind too. But is that kind of part and parcel of the fact that, okay, well, there seems to be a strategy here?
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is Carney sounds a lot like a conservative, don't you think? He basically has co-opted a lot of the things that the conservatives would do, right? He's open, he's shoulder to the wheel on pipeline projects and new pipeline projects for Alberta. He's just come to an arrangement on carbon capture. He's spending big on defense. He's spending more on defense than Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives ever promised to spend on defense. Sounds very conservative, and I think that's part of the appeal, at least, that some Canadians have when they think of Mark Carney. And the other thing is it's fairly clear in our research that because Donald Trump is who Donald Trump is, even if Mark Carney has difficulty dealing with Donald Trump, there's probably an underlying sense that he's probably doing as good as anyone can do against Donald Trump. Like, I don't think there's a sense. And during the election, we were polling on who'd be better to manage the binational relationship, Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney. Mark Carney was way ahead of Pierre Poilievre on that. So there's probably a sense that even if things don't go well with Donald Trump, it's like, well, what else could we do? We've got Mark Carney dealing with the guy, and people have generally confidence in the fact that he's the best person to manage the binational relationship at this time.
There's also been pragmatism there. He's been willing to change and completely reverse several previous liberal policies, which were, had been put in place for 10 years, and they weren't backing off of that. And of course, this has led to various changes within his cabinet as well as a result. But is our voters looking at that saying, oh, there's a guy who, he said it himself, sees the world as it is. And you have to adapt, whether you may, have beliefs, firmly held beliefs of the past. It just might not be practical to follow through on a lot of that right now.
And I think for a lot of Canadians, the other thing is they judge prime ministers by what they see the prime ministers focus on. And if you look at Mark Carney's itinerary, it's jam-packed. He's crisscrossing the country, talking to the premiers, trying to get major projects, trying to move some of the major projects forward. He's traveling the world, trying to bring investment into Canada and build trade and defense and security partnerships outside of the United States. So he's really been working at a fevered pace. I look at it, and it looks like the guy's still on the campaign trail. When you look at the intensity of his schedule. And I think as a result, he sent a message to Canadians that his government is firmly focused on the economy, firmly focused on jobs, and also looking at managing the binational relationship. And very different from the previous Liberal government, which had a different focus under Justin Trudeau, social justice, the environment, those types of things. So, and I think as a result, Carney's had a prolonged honeymoon. But the big question is, at some point, something has to happen in terms of these major projects, or even interprovincial trade and stuff like that, that there's got to be a win. And I think over time, there's just going to be more and more pressure that the Carney government will probably put on itself. Mark Carney will be putting on his own government to start to show that they are actually having an impact. Because when you look at the consumer confidence numbers, they're up a little bit, but they're still basically in neutral territory, and people are just waiting and seeing what will potentially happen.
Yeah, the consumer confidence numbers you just posted were just above break even by the looks of things, and they've been stuck there really since almost the re-election of Donald Trump and the start of the tariff war. So when it comes to everyday pocketbook issues, is there a disconnect between what voters and households are seeing in the day-to-day economy, as opposed to, again, the big pictures of maybe the federal government? Maybe that's giving the prime minister a little bit of leeway here.
No, I think there is a disconnect, because under normal circumstances, if consumer confidence can continue to be flat, the government of the day would be worried about that, because obviously when consumer confidence is strong, that's usually good politically for whoever happens to be the prime minister. So, there's a disconnect with how Canadians are feeling about the economy and the scores that they're giving. And maybe that disconnect is they think that Mark Carney is the best person for the job, and he's probably doing as much as anybody can do on this. But, the fall, Mike, the fall is going to be, I think, a little different for Mark Carney than his first year in office, because he's been able to drive the agenda through his initiatives with the premiers and internationally. In the fall, he's not going to have as much control over the agenda. And when I say that, he's going to have to deal with the fallout from a vote in Alberta on a referendum question related to the future of Alberta. He's going to have to deal with the Quebec election, where the Separatists or the Liberals could likely win that. He'll have to deal with the midterms, and he'll also have to continue to manage Donald Trump. All those things are outside of his control. I think his real test as prime minister is going to be in the fall, when he has to deal with these things that are going to be, that he's going to have to manage and navigate as prime minister, much more tricky than going to Europe or, to kind of work on security arrangements or procuring subs, and stuff like that. So I think that's going to be a real test. I think the test of how long the honeymoon will last will actually he'll slam up against that in the fall, and we'll see how he does.
And the bills are going to have to come due at some point too. It's fine to say you're buying submarines and you're building pipelines and doing all these things, but really the cost hasn't been budgeted because again, these are projects that have not yet started. The Alto rail line is, estimated at $70 billion, best guess at this point. So those are all going to start having to be itemized. And again, coming back to what you were just saying, does the reality check happen? Again, we're in the summertime, right? So a lot of people aren't necessarily paying a lot of attention to all of this at this point in time. But when things get back in September, October, is that kind of when things start to turn maybe a little bit?
Yeah, and the thing is, we're going to have a fall budget, and they're going to have to report on where the debt and the deficit is at. What our polling shows is that Canadians are generally accepting of deficits, but they want to see, what am I getting for this? So he's going to need a narrative, not just how big the deficit is because of defense spending and other projects that the federal government is spending. At the same time, he's going to need to articulate, here's what Canadians are getting, or here's what they will get from these, from these deficits that are kind of ramping up because of his effort to kind of diversify the economy.
Does it also matter how long the trade talks drag on? Like, let's say if they, get some sort of a deal in place over the next couple of months, does that take some pressure off? But having said that, if it goes into 2027 and beyond, does that just kind of, again, put consumers behind the eight ball going, I don't know what to do. So therefore, it comes back on the negotiators who are the feds.
Yeah, I worry about nothing really happening on the file because we're kind of like the frog in the boiling pot of water. Because, the thing is that one thing that the Americans do benefit from with the uncertainty is investment, right? Like, that Mark Carney can do everything possible in order to attract investment in Canada, but those investors are only going to invest in Canada if it makes sense, if Canada's seen as a safe place, if there's some sort of certainty. And, he's got uncertainty on the trade front. He's got uncertainty in Alberta. The economy's flat. He's going to need a narrative on why global companies should invest in Canada compared to other places. And, the Americans kind of win by attracting investment because most large enterprises want to be inside the U.S. market because of the importance of the U.S. market. So on the investment front, it's going to make it a much tougher sell in the fall. And he's got this big investment conference, and folks will be interested because of what he's done, but they're still going to ask those tough questions about what is the future of trade between Canada and the United States, and when is that going to be on more certain terms? And the fact of the matter is, with Donald Trump, is you have an agreement when you have an agreement with him, but that can possibly change. He can change his mind. The Gordie Howe Bridge is a key case in point, and the previous USMCA CUSMA trade negotiation is the case in point. He negotiated the current agreement. Now it's not any good, right?
But again, you had to bring that Gordie Howe Bridge into it, Nick.
Sorry.
It's okay, because really, has that not been, just such a totem for, everything it is about the United States and dealing with that regime right now? How, a deal that can be written, and set in stone, all of a sudden can't be worth the paper it's actually written on, and we still don't even know all the details of how that whole project has been renegotiated and whether or not we actually ended up getting a good deal. So,
and the original deal was a great deal for America, right? Because we basically underwrote the project. We underwrote a bridge.
We paid for it, and we're going to get it back in the tolls, and it's like wasn't even in the spotlight of Washington. But the art of the deal, Nick, the art of the deal.
But the thing is that's indicative. I think that's going to be kind of like the case study on what it means to negotiate and to deal with the Trump administration, not only for Canada, but for any other country that's dealing with the Trump administration. They should pay attention, because the U.S. we are, whether we like it or not, we're still the closest economic partner along with Mexico. We're still a security partner, and we're friends and neighbors, regardless when we're talking about Canadians and Americans. So that should be a case study as to what it really means to have an agreement with the United States under this particular administration.
Hey, listen, good talking to you, Nick. Thanks for joining me today.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.
That was pollster Nick Nanos. You've been listening to In This Economy. My name is Mike Epple. Thanks for listening. If you want to reach out, I'm on email at mike.epple@rci.rogers.com. On social, I go by @Epman. That's EPPMAN. We'll talk again soon.